The endless Libyan desert, May 1942. In the barren expanse of the North African desert, an old Ottoman fort stands alone. Bir Hakeim. To most, it looks insignificant, just a crumbling stronghold on the edge of nothing. But to the men of the Free French forces who now occupy it, this wasteland is about to become the centre of a storm that will shape the fate of North Africa. Far to the north, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, prepares his great offensive at Gazala. His ambitions are clear: break through the British 8th Army, seize Tobruk, and open the road to Egypt. To achieve this, his armoured divisions, including the Italian Ariete and Trieste, sweep toward the desert's southern flank, directly toward Bir Hakeim. To Rommel, Bir Hakeim is a strong point that must be crushed to open his southern flank. To the Free French, it is a stand that carries the weight of honour, survival, and the hope of a liberated homeland. What happens here will not be a footnote. It will be a defiant stand against overwhelming odds, a battle that slows the Desert Fox himself, and one that will echo across the sands of North Africa. The Axis juggernaut, galvanised by the daring leadership of Rommel, stands poised before one of the most crucial Allied defensive networks in North Africa, the Gazala Line. Running about 65 kilometres south from the Mediterranean coast in Libya, it extended from near the coastal town of Gazala in the north down to Bir Hakeim in the south. This line was constructed by the British 8th Army and was composed of a series of fortified positions known as boxes. These were fortified strong points, connected and protected by extensive minefields and capable of all-round defence against attacks from any direction. But at its very southern tip, like a lone sentinel, sits Bir Hakeim, a ruined outpost, battered by sand and sun, barely more than a dot on the map. Yet, for Rommel, it is everything. Why? Because Bir Hakeim anchors the flank, the gateway to the open desert. If left in Allied hands, any Axis move northward risks being counter-attacked from the south. But if Bir Hakeim falls, Rommel's Afrika Korps and its panzers can sweep around the defensive minefields and fortifications, bypass the toughest parts of the Gazala line, and outflank the British 8th Army. The southern flank collapses, the back door to Tobruk, the pivotal port city, swings wide open. Rommel's plan is bold: a massive right hook through the desert, pivoting around Bir Hakeim, which must be eliminated at any cost. Thus, tiny Bir Hakeim, desolate, forgotten, becomes the keystone of the Desert War, the pivot on which the fate of North Africa turns. It is here that Rommel gambles for supremacy. Knock down this southern door, and the whole Allied position comes crashing down. As the desert sun rose in late May 1942, four very different forces converged on a lonely fortress. Each carried its own history, its own reputation, and its own fate. At the centre stood General Marie-Pierre Kœnig's Free French 1st Brigade, 3,700 strong, foreign legionnaires, colonial troops from parts of Africa and the Middle East, gunners, engineers, medical corps. A patchwork army of exiles and volunteers determined to prove France had not surrendered. Their weapons were outdated, their numbers few, but their spirit unbroken. For them, Bir Hakeim was not just a stronghold, it was France itself, standing defiant in the desert. To the west, the 132nd Armoured Division Ariete prepared to strike. Italy's premier tank division in North Africa, Ariete, had seen bitter fighting across the desert. Its M13 and M14 tanks carried seasoned crews, veterans of armoured thrusts, and bruising losses against British Matildas and Crusaders. For the Ariete, Bir Hakeim was another test of will, an opportunity to prove Italian armour could break through the toughest defences. Alongside the Ariete came the 101st Motorised Division Trieste. Their strength lay not in tanks but in mobility, infantry borne on trucks and supported by artillery batteries, engineers and anti-tank guns. It would fall to Trieste to penetrate minefields, open corridors for the panzers and press the attacks when the armour faltered. In the sands before Bir Hakeim, they would become the hammer against the Free French shield. Yet it was not the Italians alone. Overseeing the assault was the commander feared by his enemies and revered by his men, Rommel, the Desert Fox. Under him, the panzer divisions of the Afrika Korps, the 15th and 21st, rolled into battle. Tough, disciplined and experienced, these formations had driven the British from Cyrenaica to the gates of Egypt. Their panzers were fewer and lighter than those of other war fronts, but in speed, coordination and daring they were unmatched. Their presence turned every engagement into a deadly dance of manoeuvre and fire. So the lines were drawn, the Free French 1st Brigade on one side, holding a lonely fortress in defiance of surrender, and on the other the combined weight of Ariete, Trieste and the panzer divisions of the Afrika Korps. Bir Hakeim would become their crucible and their proving ground. For the German-Italian army, Bir Hakeim had to be neutralised. The strategy was clear. The Italian Trieste division would move against the minefields and defensive works near the fortress, pressing from the north. Meanwhile, the armoured Ariete division was tasked with driving along the desert tracks toward Bir Hakeim itself, serving as the striking force on the southern flank. Beyond them, Rommel had prepared his hallmark manoeuvre, a sweeping advance of the German panzer divisions. His tanks would swing wide, moving south, then curving north behind Bir Hakeim to execute an encirclement and trap the fortress in isolation. With the southern anchor destroyed, the Gazala line itself could unravel. But the plan encountered resistance almost immediately. On the 27th of May 1942, as the Ariete Division advanced, it ran into a prepared British Indian formation, the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade. Their tanks, armoured cars and anti-tank guns lay in wait. But the Ariete pressed relentlessly. Despite heavy losses, the Italian tanks and artillery overwhelmed the brigade's positions. By the evening, the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. The result was costly. The Ariete Division lost around 32 tanks disabled or destroyed, along with a number of guns and trucks. But the Ariete's spearhead of M13 and M14 tanks broke the lines of the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade. The brigade lost nearly its entire transport, artillery and vehicles, with around 600 men killed, wounded or captured, rendering the brigade ineffective for the remainder of the campaign. The Ariete's victory cleared Rommel's southern approach, though at a steep price. The German panzer divisions continued their northern sweep according to Rommel's plan to encircle Bir Hakeim. Following the destruction of the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade, the Axis advance pressed forward. Most of the Italian Ariete Armoured Division, together with Rommel's German panzer formations, continued their great wheel north-eastward. Their movement was part of the wider encirclement, a drive racing around behind the British Gazala line, aiming to cut supply routes and collapse the Allied front. But not all of Ariete advanced with the panzers. One formation was given a different task. The 9th Tank Battalion of Ariete, commanded by Colonel Prestisimoni, was ordered to drive directly against the fortress of Bir Hakeim itself. Prestisimoni's men had not taken part in the battle against the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade. The battalion moved forward in the barren desert, pushing directly into the southern minefields laid by the Free French defenders. Here the Italians encountered some of the most determined resistance of the campaign. The tanks of the battalion led the lines, with trucks transporting troops of the Bersaglieri following in behind. But the fortress was heavily fortified. French artillery, sighted with precision, opened fire. Shells tore through the attackers, driving back the infantry trucks and halting the armoured columns before they could breach the defences. The auto-transporters of troops fell back. The tanks dispersed but drove on through the minefields. Tanks were lost and yet did not retreat. Only 10 managed to break through the minefield, reaching the French artillery, only to be knocked out by the shells of field guns. The rest of the 9th Tank Battalion, along with the trucks of infantry, retreated back to the rest of the Ariete Division to the northeast. 31 tanks and 1 Semaventi self-propelled gun were lost. At the same time, to the north of Bir Hakeim, the Italian Trieste motorised division was engaged in its own grim struggle. Tasked with advancing around the northern portion of the fortress perimeter, Trieste's engineers attempted to cut paths through yet more minefields. Slowly and under constant fire, they tried to widen the encirclement ring. Their progress was measured in yards, not miles, and every attempt to break through was repulsed. Together, Prestissimone's stalled battalion to the south and Trieste's slow-moving columns to the north marked the beginning of the Axis assaults on the fortress itself. Yet, from the outset, Bir Hakeim did not yield. Ensured that both Italian thrusts, north and south, were checked before they could penetrate the box. These failed initial assaults set the tone for what would come, a prolonged siege of desperate attacks and equally determined resistance. Though the Axis forces encircled the fortress itself refused to collapse. The initial Axis thrusts on Bir Hakeim had failed. Colonel Prestissimone's 9th Battalion of the Ariete Division had been thrown back by concentrated Free French artillery and minefields. To the north, the Trieste motorised division had struggled to cut lanes through defensive belts, advancing only under constant fire. With Bir Hakeim still unbroken, Rommel turned to heavier measures. By the end of May, Luftwaffe squadrons and Italian bombers, escorted by fighters such as the Macchi C-202 Folgore, were brought to bear. Day after day, aircraft strafed and bombed the fortress, pounding trenches, minefields and supply points. Artillery was moved into position around the box. Italian guns, backed by German batteries, opened a relentless bombardment. Shells churned the desert floor, trying to crush the defenders into submission. The Italians did not act alone. To the north of Bir Hakeim, the Trieste division was reinforced by Germany's 90th Light Division, elite desert troops trained for rapid infantry assaults. They had been fighting further east, having swung around from the south with initial victories on the Allies, but after reversals had to fall back and move to support the Trieste. Together, Trieste and the 90th Light probed the French perimeter with coordinated attacks. Time and again they pushed forward under cover of artillery, attempting to breach the northern edge of the fortress, but each assault was stopped in machine gun crossfire, or broken up by defensive barrages. German infantry, despite their experience, found the French defences immovable. Rommel's armoured forces to the northeast, the German 15th Panzer and 21st Panzer Divisions, fought running battles with British armoured brigades. These clashes during much of the desert's open ground as M3 Grants faced Panzer IIIs and IVs in swirling combat. The struggle for Bir Hakeim could not be separated from this wider desert battle. Every day of resistance tied down German armour when Rommel needed it most against British counter-thrusts. Recognising the cost of piecemeal strikes, Rommel authorised a more concentrated effort. The Ariete Armoured Division, having regrouped, now joined Trieste and the 90th Light Division in renewed coordinated assaults. Italian armoured battalions pressed in from the south and east, while German infantry and Trieste's engineers forced pressure from the north. Bombardment intensified, with the Luftwaffe unleashing massive raids to soften the fortress before each attack. From late May into early June, this combined pressure encircled Bir Hakeim completely. Axis units tightened the ring, expecting the French defenders to falter. Instead, the garrison resisted with unyielding tenacity, repairing trenches under fire, repelling attacks, and surviving under air bombardments. Supplies ran low, casualties mounted, but the fortress held. For the Axis, every day the fortress remained in Free French hands strained logistics and slowed their wider Gazala offensive. Yet with relentless pressure from Trieste, Ariete, the 90th Light Division and the panzers beyond, the noose around Bir Hakeim was tightening. The stage was set for the climactic battles of early June, when Rommel would finally commit overwhelming force to batter the fortress into submission. As May turned to June, Bir Hakeim remained under siege. The Free French garrison, barely 4,000 strong, had withstood waves of attacks by Italian and German forces, supported by artillery bombardments and near-daily air raids. Conditions inside the fortress deteriorated rapidly. Water was scarce, casualties mounted, and supply drops by the Royal Air Force were increasingly difficult under Axis pressure. Despite their isolation, the defenders clung to their positions, disrupting Rommel's timetable for the Gazala offensive. The Axis intensified their efforts. The Trieste Division and the 90th Light Division tightened pressure from the north. The Ariete Division pushed on the southern front alongside concentrated bombardment. From the sky, the Luftwaffe launched its heaviest assaults of the battle. Thousands of bombs fell within the defensive perimeter, flattening trenches, gun pits and shelters. The desert floor shook under days of relentless fire. On the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of June, surrender proposals are issued by Italian and German forces. General Giuseppe Di Stefanis, commander of the Ariete, was one of the commanders asking General Kœnig to surrender. One notable reply from General Kœnig: "Gentlemen, thank your generals for their pleasant conduct, but tell them there is no question of surrender." For days, the Free French withstood frequent air attacks from the Luftwaffe, Stuka dive bombers and strafing Messerschmitts. Rommel sent 2 captured British soldiers to Bir Hakeim with a message to General Kœnig. The message was written on a telegram. Both soldiers had a copy. Rommel's message read: "To the troops of Bir Hakeim, any further resistance will only serve to spill more blood to no avail. You will suffer the same fate as the 2 English brigades in Got el Ualeb that were destroyed the day before yesterday. We will stop fighting if you show white flags and come to us without weapons." General Kœnig's forces remained undeterred. The French guns immediately opened heavy fire on all enemy vehicles coming at close range. As the guns fired, the general gave an order to all unit commanders, the order to be communicated to their men. Here are General Kœnig's orders. "We must now expect serious attack from all quarters, aircraft, tanks, artillery, infantry. It will be powerful. I repeat my orders and my certainty that all of you will carry out your duty without faltering, as is required of you, even if you are cut off. Our task is to hold the ground, whatever the cost, until our victory is complete. This order must be clearly conveyed to all ranks and men, and good luck to you all. Headquarters, June 3rd, 1942, 9:30 a.m, Kœnig." After the first week of June, General Kœnig, commanding the garrison, recognised the strain. With Axis units now fully encircling the fortress, his forces running out of ammunition and water, he requested permission from the British High Command to withdraw before Bir Hakeim was overwhelmed. The request, however, was denied. The British Army understood the fortress's symbolic and strategic value. So long as it stood, Rommel could not shift his full weight against the remainder of the Gazala line. Kœnig was ordered to hold his ground, and his forces stood. The Western Desert Air Force of the British provided much-needed support to the defenders at Bir Hakeim. The sight of the British aircraft flying above boosted the morale of the men. British fighters and bombers would swoop down, attacking German convoys and besieging forces. The Free French seemed even more determined to hold as each day passed. On the 9th of June, the Axis final assault began. Under a shroud of artillery and air attacks, German infantry, Italian armour and engineers advanced into the southeastern corner of the fortress. This time the French could not throw them back. Axis units broke into the perimeter, overrunning positions and cutting into the heart of the defences. The evacuation order was given. By now, Kœnig knew the garrison could not hold out much longer. Refusing annihilation or surrender, he prepared for an outbreak. Under cover of darkness on the night of the 10th to 11th of June, the Free French organised their remaining strength. Columns of trucks, carriers and infantry moved through a lane cut in the minefields, covered by rearguard units who fought fiercely to keep the passage open. Despite confusion and scattered fighting, the majority of the garrison broke free, escaping to the east to rejoin the 8th Army. The fortress itself was left in ruins, scarred by bombardment and fire. Bir Hakeim had finally fallen. Axis forces had claimed the ground, but the Free French garrison had denied them an easy victory. By holding the fortress for more than 2 weeks under overwhelming attack, they bought precious time, disrupted Rommel's plans, and provided a powerful symbol of resistance that would echo throughout the war. Rommel remarked on the conflict, "Seldom in Africa was I given such a hard-fought struggle." Many of the box fortresses along the Gazala line were surrounded by mines, placed 1 metre apart from each other. Around the perimeter of the box would be trenches and positioned artillery. It would be a trap for advancing tanks. The Ariete division had their orders from Rommel to advance on Bir Hakeim. Perhaps he had underestimated the strength of the artillery and the will to fight from the Free French. The 9th Tank Battalion of the 132nd Armoured Division Ariete made that first advance one that failed. The battalion had fallen into the trap, bogged down by mines and facing artillery fire. The troop transporters had also been targeted and had fallen back. The tanks continued to advance. This is my tactical map of the event using graphics from the game War Thunder. This is not to scale, of course. I only have a small map, no advanced 3D battle map, I'm afraid, guys. This will have to do. You have to think these mines placed outside the graphic for the Bir Hakeim box stretched for kilometres. Here we have the battalion of Caro M tanks. This would be around 60 tanks, advancing toward the minefield, followed by the troop transporters along with Semaventi. The trucks get forced back by artillery, but the tanks continue the advance without infantry support. The Ariete had the 8th Bersaglieri Regiment of Infantry in these transporters. If the Bersaglieri infantry had been able to stay and support the Ariete tanks at Bir Hakeim, they could have helped with the minefields in several ways typical of World War II infantry anti-mine techniques. Infantry would have conducted manual probing and detection of mines using bayonets or specialised probes to locate the mines carefully. Once detected, they could clear paths by disarming or detonating mines safely or marking safe lanes through the fields for the tanks to pass. Infantry would have secured the area from enemy defenders, preventing counterattacks while the mine clearing was carried out. Fire suppression from machine gun units would be a strategy for this. Infantry integration with tanks would allow for more coordinated manoeuvres, reducing tank losses from mines and ambushes. Without infantry support, tanks had to move through the minefields blindly, facing higher risks of detonating mines with no close infantry to scout or clear safe passages. Thus, infantry support was crucial for effective minefield breaching and safe tank advances in desert warfare. The Bersaglieri, as light infantry trained for rapid movement and assault, were well suited for such tasks if they had not been forced to retreat by artillery fire. Was it a tactical mistake to continue the advance, and if so, who is to blame for the leadership decision? The Ariete Division's commander at the time was General Giuseppe Di Stefanis. He was a competent leader and his career saw him receive promotions during the war. He would be commanding the main body of the Ariete Division. His orders for the division would have been to attack Bir Hakeim, approaching from the southeast, and then meet with the other panzer divisions of the Afrika Korps and eventually working with the Trieste. He may have ordered the 9th Tank Battalion to break off, but this decision would have been made with Rommel's orders in mind to advance on Bir Hakeim. The leadership we should focus on is at battalion level. The 9th Tank Battalion was led by Colonel Presti-Simoni. His battalion charged the French defences but lost 31 tanks and a self-propelled gun to mines and French 75mm anti-tank guns. Only 10 tanks managed to get through the minefields before being knocked out, causing significant Italian casualties. Following this, the remnants of the 9th Battalion retreated to the main body of the Ariete Division, which then moved north towards Bir el Hamat as part of Rommel's broader operational plan. Rommel's plans were fluid and changes happened as events occurred, possibly operational plans altered after the 9th Battalion's failure to take Bir Hakeim. While Rommel's overarching orders emphasised aggressive rapid advances to maintain momentum, this operational pressure did not eliminate the responsibility of battalion commanders like Colonel Prestisimone to balance aggression with tactical prudence, especially when faced with significant risks such as dense minefields. You can commend him for tenacity and discipline, but he has a responsibility for the lives of his men and the preservation of tanks and equipment. Losing over 30 tanks in a single assault was a devastating blow, not just in raw numbers but in morale and combat effectiveness, and such losses would logically call for caution on Prestisimone's part. Prestisimone must manage the advance and coordinate with infantry. That includes dealing with obstacles like minefields. There is a failure to achieve this. Even under pressure to keep advancing, it seems to me that a commander would assess battlefield conditions continuously, including enemy defences and hazards like minefields, coordinate closely with infantry and engineers to ensure that obstacles were reduced before tanks exposed themselves unnecessarily, adapt orders accordingly, perhaps pausing or pulling back to minimise further losses and re-establish combat effectiveness, especially after seeing the infantry units fall back, but Prestisimone chose to press on. Prestisimone may have rigidly interpreted the aggressive intent imposed from higher command that discouraged tactical withdrawals. There would have been command tanks included in the battalion to carry out battlefield communications, to try and redirect tanks for a retreat. Any of you viewers watching this with military experience, let me know what you think. What should Prestisimone have done? I'm not a military man and don't have experience commanding a tank. Now, we should analyse the tactical role of the 101st Motorised Division Trieste. The Trieste Division was primarily a motorised infantry unit tasked with creating vital gaps in the heavily mined defensive belts around Bir Hakeim. This division did not have many tanks. It consisted of fast-moving infantry units transported in trucks supported by artillery. They had one battalion of M1340 tanks. Specifically, the division's role was to clear and breach minefields north of the Bir Hakeim box near the Sidi Mufta area. This was crucial for opening a logistics and supply route for the German panzer divisions to advance further north and east. There were two belts of mines leading from Bir Hakeim to Sidi Mufta and northeast to Bir el Hamat. The Trieste had to clear paths through these belts. They were also assisted by Italian reinforcements, the Piava Infantry Division. Within these belts, north of Bir Hakeim, would be an area called the Cauldron. If we look at this drawing of the map of the Gazala line, with Bir Hakeim to the south, you can see these three belts of mines. Within that zone or piece of land is what I interpret as the Cauldron. The Trieste and later divisions of Rommel's Afrika Korps would be positioned here, and once Bir Hakeim is taken, it would be the base for further operations, to proceed northeast beyond another box, Knight's Bridge, positioned further back from the main Gazala line, and then on to Bir el Hamat, and from there to cut off the British 8th Army and take Tobruk. The British, meanwhile, are also clearing pathways through these belts of mines to attack the Germans and Italians north of Bir Hakeim. The objective was to cut off Rommel and force him to surrender. Rommel even had thoughts about surrendering if it hadn't have been Trieste's crucial role and success in clearing paths through the belts of mines. Convoys were able to travel through these paths and supply Rommel's Afrika Korps of infantry and panzer divisions with ammunition, water and fuel. The Trieste operated alongside the 90th Light Division during later stages of the siege to assault French defensive positions at Bir Hakeim directly. The 90th Light Division had come in from the east to help the Italian division. The infantry, supported by artillery and engineers and tanks, were utilised to storm positions, clear obstacles and open pathways, facilitating the Axis armoured advance. The Trieste division was effectively used as the tactical hammer against the Free French defensive perimeter, after the initial armoured thrust by the Ariete division stalled and suffered heavy losses. The Trieste's assault included several infantry skirmishes and engagements on ridges and fire control points surrounding Bir Hakeim, such as Point 186, which was strategically important for observation and artillery coordination. Clearing the minefields facilitated Axis resupplies, which allowed Rommel's panzer units to maintain momentum toward their broader objectives along the Gazala line. After the Ariete Division's first failed assault on Bir Hakeim, the division was first ordered to venture north towards Bir el Hamat as part of Rommel's plan. Later in the battle, Rommel instead decided to split his forces, deciding on June the 5th to attack Bir Hakeim from the east with the Ariete Division and the 21st Panzer Division, while sending the 15th Panzer Division northwards against the Knightsbridge Box, which stood between Bir Hakeim and Bir el Hamat. The Trieste worked hard to the north of Bir Hakeim and was involved in opening a supply route between the Bir Hakeim Box and the Sidi Mufta Box. The Battle of Bir Hakeim enhanced Trieste's reputation, and the battle went better for this division than the Ariete Army Division, who experienced victory at the expense of heavy losses. From a tactical point of view, the Luftwaffe's aerial bombardment at Bir Hakeim played a significant role in the Axis siege, though the fortress itself was exceptionally well fortified and resisted direct destruction. The Luftwaffe, particularly with Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, conducted over 20 bombing raids against Bir Hakeim, accompanied by Italian aircraft, fighter planes like the Mach C-202 Folgore. Their attacks focused on softening defences, disrupting supply and communications, and targeting the Allies' vehicles and artillery positions around the fortress. Despite the intensity and frequency of these raids, the French defensive positions were so well built, many underground or heavily fortified, that they were described as almost invulnerable to aerial bombing. The physical fortifications absorbed much of the damage, protecting the Free French troops inside. However, the bombardments had important indirect effects. Axis artillery and air raids attempted to neutralise French guns and observation posts outside the main perimeter. The attacks disrupted Free French logistics and hindered resupply efforts, increasing pressure on the defenders over time. They were running out of ammunition and water. The raids inflicted damage on the Allies' supply lines and vehicles operating in the vicinity, while RAF fighter bombers simultaneously harassed Luftwaffe aircraft and Axis columns, leading to high air combat intensity. The psychological effect of aerial bombardment weighed heavily on both sides, but the resilience of the defenders boosted morale, especially when RAF support was reported. The Luftwaffe's tactical use of bombing at Bir Hakeim was less about pulverising an impregnable fortress and more about trying to isolate, harass and weaken the defenders and their supporting units. The physical defences held up well, but the sustained pressure helped tighten the Axis stranglehold and contributed to the eventual erosion of Free French capacity over the prolonged siege. At Bir Hakeim in May-June 1942, a desert outpost became more than a fortress. It became a symbol. For 2 relentless weeks, the Free French of General Kœnig held their ground against overwhelming force. Italian divisions like Trieste and Ariete, seasoned and hard-hitting formations, threw themselves again and again at the defences, but the box held. It was a tactical victory for the German-Italian forces, but just as importantly for the Allies, a tactical delay. Every day the Free French endured, every attack they repelled, was one more day bought for the rest of the 8th Army. By slowing Rommel's advance, Bir Hakeim forced the Axis timetable into disarray. What seemed at first like just a stubborn pocket of resistance soon stretched into the crucial margin of time the British would desperately need. And it was time that made all the difference. At El Alamein, just weeks later, the British were no longer retreating, but regrouped and reinforced. The divisions that had battered themselves at Bir Hakeim would face the 8th Army again, but this time they would be broken. For France, the defence of Bir Hakeim was more than a battle. It was proof that its spirit was unbroken, its soldiers unbowed. A nation that had seemed defeated 2 years earlier showed the world that it could still fight, and fight with honour. Bir Hakeim rekindled a nation's spirit, a stand that shifted the balance in North Africa.